At 6:10, the lead German shepherd pulled down his rescue harness and laid it at the former SEAL's boots. He had come only to sell his late father's cabin, so he hung the harness back without speaking. Leather struck wood. 5 more dogs rose together, their breath whitening in the cold mudroom air. The dog was not asking for affection. He was waiting for a morning command the dead man once gave. A transport van was coming by 9, and sending them away would let him leave before doubt took hold. Then the harness fell again, and all 6 dogs faced the unopened door, as if the mountain needed them. Where are you watching from today? Stay with us until the end, then tell us what this story meant to you. Please like, share, and subscribe as we work toward welcoming our first 1,000 subscribers. Ethan Cole had returned to Black Pine to settle his late father's estate, sell the mountain cabin, and go back to Washington before his next work contract began. The problem was that the cabin had not been left empty. 6 German shepherds still lived in the heated kennel room beside the mudroom. They had been trained to pull a rescue sled along the narrow winter roads above the village. Ethan had already decided they would be evaluated and transferred to a working dog organization in the valley. At 6:10 on his second morning, the largest dog walked to the wall beside the front door, lifted a burgundy harness from its peg, and placed it at Ethan's feet. Ranger looked toward the snow-covered road outside. Behind him, the other 5 dogs stood up together. They were ready to work. Their owner had been dead for 12 days. Ethan stared at the harness. The cabin was quiet, except for the low hum of the heater and the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Thin morning light reached through the windows, touching the black saddle along Ranger's back and the 2 amber patches above his eyes. Tess, the sable female who stood beside him, waited without moving. The 4 dogs behind her had formed a loose line as naturally as people taking their places in a familiar room. Ethan pushed away from the kitchen table. At 54, he still carried the broad shoulders and controlled movements of a man who had spent years learning not to waste energy. His olive combat shirt fit close across his chest, while faded camouflage covered the sleeves. Dark hair swept back from a face sharpened by time, with silver showing clearly at both temples. He picked up the harness. "The work is over," he said. He returned it to the peg. Ranger did not bark. He did not scratch at the door or try to pull the harness down again. The tip of his left ear, bent slightly outward from an old injury, remained still. He simply stood beneath the peg and waited. That quiet patience unsettled Ethan more than resistance would have. He went back to the table, opened the folder from the estate attorney, and forced himself to read the same paragraph for the 3rd time. His father had placed the cabin, 12 acres of timber, the sled equipment, and the outbuildings, into a living trust. Ethan had been named successor trustee. He had the authority to manage the property and prepare it for sale. But there were still inventories to complete, forms to sign, and an appraisal to arrange. He could not walk in, hand someone a key, and leave. For most of his adult life, leaving had been the one thing Ethan did well. A truck came up the cabin road shortly after 7. Walter Boone climbed out carrying 2 metal feed pails. He was 66, square-faced and weathered, with white hair beneath a dark brown knit cap. His rust-colored canvas coat hung lower on the right, because that shoulder had lost strength after years of work and an injury he rarely discussed. Walter entered through the mudroom without knocking. Ranger glanced at him, then looked back at Ethan. Walter noticed the harness on the peg. "He asked you," he said. "He dropped leather on the floor. That is how he asks." Walter moved among the dogs with the calm authority of someone who had repeated the same routine thousands of times. A quiet word kept Ranger in place, while he measured food into 6 bowls. Ethan watched the dogs wait. No barking, no pushing, no confusion. "You've been doing this twice a day?" he asked. "Since your father went into the hospital." The trust left money for 6 months of care. I know. I witnessed the agreement. Ethan leaned against the counter and folded his arms. He planned better for the dogs than he planned for most people. Walter did not rush to defend the dead. He planned for you to have a choice, he said. That is different from choosing for you. The words landed where Ethan did not want them. His final phone call with his father had ended badly, not with one terrible sentence, but with years of disappointment finally finding voices. His father had said some responsibilities could not be handled by walking away. Ethan had answered that Black Pine had always received the best of him, while his family learned to live on whatever remained. Neither man had called again. Walter lowered the bowls, only after all 6 dogs had settled. I can keep feeding them, he said. I can exercise them light, but I cannot take the team. Because of your shoulder? That is part of it. Walter lifted an empty pail with his left hand. 6 working dogs need more than food and a fenced yard. They need conditioning, veterinary checks, a handler who understands the team, someone strong enough to manage a sled if the dogs lose rhythm. There is a non-profit near Missoula that evaluates retired working dogs. Walter looked toward Ranger. They are not retired. They may have to be. That is your decision. Ethan waited for judgment to follow. It did not. Walter gathered the empty pails and walked toward the kennel room. By refusing to argue, he left Ethan alone with the full weight of his own choice. By 10 that morning, Ethan had called a property appraiser. She agreed to come the next day and prepare the valuation needed before the cabin could be listed. His second call went to an organization that accepted working dogs for reassignment or retirement. The woman on the phone asked several questions about age, health, training history, and behavior. Then she asked, "Do they still want to work?" Ethan looked through the kitchen doorway. Ranger had settled beside the front wall, directly below the harness peg. His head rested on his paws, but his amber-brown eyes remained open. "Yes," Ethan said. "They do." "In that case, we should assess them as a team before discussing separation." That would be best. He believed that. Or at least, he needed to believe it. For the rest of the day, Ethan worked through the cabin, one room at a time. He found no farewell letter hidden in a drawer, no recorded confession, no final instructions telling him what kind of man he was supposed to become. There was only the ordinary evidence of a life that had stopped without warning. A pair of reading glasses beside an armchair, coffee sealed in a metal tin, 2 work shirts hanging above the stove, and a half-used block of cedar soap beside the sink. In the bottom drawer of his father's desk, Ethan found a thick maintenance ledger. The cover was cracked. Several pages were marked by grease, snowmelt, or fingerprints darkened with age. Inside were dates, route numbers, equipment checks, road conditions, and short records of trips made by the dog team. North Ridge check. Radio battery delivered. Medicine carried to Bell Crossing. Fallen tree cleared from lower trail. The handwriting was familiar, firm, narrow, and unwilling to waste space. Ethan read one page, then another. He stopped before the entries began to form a story. He closed the ledger and placed it in a cardboard box with the trust documents. He was not ready to let his father speak through columns of ink after refusing to speak clearly while he was alive. Walter returned before sunset. Together they checked the dogs' paws, coats, and harnesses. Ethan told himself the work was necessary because the animals had to remain healthy until the transfer. When he reached for Ranger's front paw, the dog pulled it away. Ethan's first instinct was to tighten his grip. Instead, he stopped. Ranger watched him, his head tilted slightly to the left. Ethan waited without giving another command. After several seconds, Ranger placed the paw back on the floor and allowed Ethan to inspect the pad. It was not trust, but it was no longer a refusal. Walter saw the exchange and said nothing. Before leaving, he confirmed that the appraiser and the dog organization would both arrive at 9 the next morning. That night, Ethan stood in the doorway of the kennel room after the dogs had settled. Ranger lay nearest the inside door. Tess rested just behind him. The other four had formed a quiet arc around the room, without anyone directing them. The cabin still followed a schedule. The dogs still understood rank, work, and time. Walter still came twice each day. The feed had been paid for. The equipment had been maintained. Even the transfer had been made possible without forcing Ethan to keep them. He had believed he inherited a building, a piece of land, and 6 animals that needed somewhere else to go. Now he understood that he had inherited the authority to interrupt a living system that had continued after its central man was gone. Understanding did not change his decision. Before going to bed, Ethan confirmed the appraisal appointment and printed the transfer forms. At 6:10 the next morning, leather struck wood again. This time, Ethan knew what the sound meant. He did not rise immediately. Ranger stood beneath the peg with the burgundy harness at his feet. Tess waited at his shoulder. 4 dogs stood behind them, ready to take their places. Ethan looked at the team for a long moment. Then he picked up the harness and carried it to the mudroom. At 9, 2 vehicles climbed the cabin road. One belonged to the appraiser. The second was a white transport van marked with the name of the working dog organization. Walter began bringing the dogs out one at a time. Tess climbed into the van when asked. The next 4 followed, each pausing briefly to look toward the cabin before stepping inside. Ranger came last. Ethan held the lead, while Walter lowered the metal step. "Up," Ethan said. Ranger looked into the van. Then he turned his head toward the cabin door. For 1 second, the lead went slack. Ranger twisted sharply, pulled the leather through Ethan's gloved hand, and ran. He did not head toward the village. He took the narrow forest road beyond the yard, the same road the team had once used every morning, and disappeared between the snow-laden pines. "Ranger!" Ethan's voice carried into the trees, but the German shepherd did not turn back. The leather lead dragged behind him, drawing a thin line across the snow. Ranger ran with purpose, not panic. Head level, stride controlled, ears fixed toward the forest road. Ethan left the transport van, the appraiser, and the open cabin door behind him. He went after the dog. Snow covered the narrow road in an unbroken layer, except for Ranger's tracks and the shallow grooves left by an old sled. Ethan's waterproof boots struck hard ground beneath the powder. His charcoal cargo pants gathered snow at the cuffs, and the camouflage sleeves of his olive combat shirt were unprotected against the cold until he pulled on the dark canvas coat hanging beside the mudroom. Behind him, Walter called for the driver to keep the other dogs inside the van. "Do not let them follow." Ethan heard the metal door slide shut. Ranger reached the first bend and stopped. For a moment, Ethan thought the dog had finally accepted the command. Then Ranger looked directly at him, waited until the distance between them shortened, and started running again. He was not escaping. He was making sure Ethan followed. That realization changed the pursuit. Ethan stopped shouting. He settled into a steady pace and began watching the dog instead of trying to overpower him from a distance. The road climbed through lodgepole pine and fir. It had not been plowed, but the snow was shallower in the center, packed beneath the surface by years of repeated winter travel. Ranger knew where to place his feet. Every few hundred yards, he paused and looked back. Ethan had spent enough years reading movement to recognize intention. Ranger was following a route he had traveled many times before. The dog did not search the woods or lift his nose toward random scents. He stayed close to one edge of the trail, passing the same side of each marker post as if an invisible line ran beneath the snow. Walter caught up slowly, breathing hard but refusing help. His rust-colored coat was open at the throat, and his right arm stayed close to his body. "You knew he would do this?" Ethan asked. "No, but you know where he is going." "I know the road." Walter looked toward Ranger, now waiting beside a stand of young firs. Your father ran the morning check along this route. Ranger led most of them. How far? Less than 2 miles. Ethan looked back through the trees. The cabin was no longer visible. The appraiser is waiting. She is being paid by the hour. And the transport van? They will wait if you ask them. Ranger moved again before Ethan answered. The forest road narrowed and curved toward the main supply route above Black Pine. Through the trees, Ethan could see the white roofs of the village far below. A small church stood near the center, its steeple rising above the other buildings. From that distance, Black Pine looked quiet enough to be harmless. The mountain around it was not. A wooden post appeared beside the trail, half buried in snow. A strip of faded reflective material circled the top. Ranger passed it on the left without slowing. 30 yards farther, he stopped beside a gray metal cabinet mounted on 2 treated posts. The cabinet was no larger than a kitchen cupboard. A short antenna rose from its roof, and a weather-stained warning placard identified it as part of the county avalanche monitoring network. Ranger stood in front of it. He waited. Nothing happened. Ethan glanced at Walter. What is he expecting? A tone. What kind of tone? One short confirmation signal. The station runs a self-check near this time every morning. Your father trained the dogs to pause here until they heard it. Ethan looked at his watch. 6:32. They had left the cabin later than the normal route schedule, but only by minutes. Ranger touched his nose to a metal plate near the bottom of the cabinet. Then he stepped back and waited again. Still no sound. That touch was trained, Ethan asked. If a checkpoint did not answer, Ranger marked it. Your father would inspect the outside, record the failure, and call Marcus. Ranger does not know the equipment is broken. No, he knows part of the routine is missing. That distinction mattered. Ethan approached the cabinet, but did not open the sealed interior panel. The exterior service compartment had a simple latch intended for visual inspection. He lifted it carefully. Inside, a plastic tray had space for a backup battery. The tray was empty. A maintenance sticker on the inside of the door had been signed and dated less than 3 weeks earlier. Ethan ran one gloved finger beneath the printed date. Could the battery have been removed for winter storage? Walter shook his head. Winter is when it is needed. Could someone from the county have taken it? Maybe. Marcus will know what should be here. Ethan examined the compartment without touching the wiring. The contacts were clean. No corrosion. No sign that snow or moisture had forced a failure. The absence looked deliberate, but deliberate did not mean criminal. A technician could have removed the battery for testing. A replacement could have been delayed. A record could have been signed in error. Ethan had learned long ago that the first explanation was rarely the whole explanation, but suspicion was not evidence. Walter took an old flip phone from his coat. There is a stronger signal near the road. While Walter made the call, Ethan crouched beside Ranger. The dog's breathing had slowed. Snow clung to the black fur above his paws, but he showed no sign of exhaustion. He watched the cabinet, then looked toward the road beyond it. Ethan reached for the trailing lead. Ranger did not pull away. This time, Ethan closed his hand around the leather without tightening it. Walter returned after several minutes. Marcus Lee says leave the internal panel closed. He will come tomorrow with the correct equipment. Who is Marcus? Retired telecommunications technician, 71. He maintained half the relay stations in this county before the contract work was outsourced. Did you tell him about the empty tray? I did. And? He said the station is listed as having a backup battery. Ethan looked at the dated sticker again. A service record claiming one thing, an open compartment showing another. That was not proof of anything beyond a discrepancy, but it was enough to keep him from dismissing the stop as a dog repeating an obsolete habit. The radio clip to Walter's coat crackled. The transport representative's voice came through, faint but understandable. They needed to know whether to continue the assessment or reschedule. Ethan looked at Ranger. The dog had not led him to a hidden box, a grave, or some impossible secret. He had followed a route, waited for a familiar sound, and responded when that sound did not come. The meaning had come from training, not mystery. That made the choice harder to ignore. "Tell them we are coming back," Ethan said. Walter lifted his radio. "And tell them not to load the dogs again." Walter studied Ethan. "For today?" "For a few days." They walked back at a slower pace. Ranger stayed beside Ethan rather than pulling ahead. He did not heal perfectly, but he no longer needed to look back to see whether Ethan was following. When the cabin came into view, the appraiser stood on the porch, speaking with the transport representative. The other 5 dogs remained inside the van, calm but attentive. Tess rose as soon as Ranger appeared. He approached the open side door. Tess leaned forward and touched her nose briefly to his shoulder. Only then did she settle again. Ethan spoke first to the representative. "I need to postpone the transfer." The woman, a practical-looking person in a navy winter jacket, did not seem offended. "Are you reconsidering placement?" "I'm confirming their work status, veterinary records, and whether any local obligations apply to the team." The last phrase sounded formal because Ethan wanted distance from the real reason. She nodded. "We can reschedule. Keeping the team together for several more days will not harm the process." The appraiser completed her inspection room by room. Ethan answered questions about the roof. Well, heating system, outbuildings, and trust documents. When she placed the preliminary listing authorization on the kitchen table, he read it but did not sign. "I will review it tonight," he said. By late afternoon, the van was gone, and all 6 dogs were back in the kennel room. Nothing outwardly had changed. The cabin was still his to manage. The dogs still needed a permanent decision. His contract in Washington still had a start date. Yet Ethan had postponed the 2 choices he had come to Black Pine to complete. That evening, after Walter left, he carried the maintenance ledger from the cardboard box to the kitchen table. He began with the most recent entries. The pages did not accuse anyone. His father's handwriting remained spare and factual. No confirmation tone, North Station, battery request pending, medication delivery delayed, team carried sealed package to lower crossing, fuel truck did not arrive, road listed open. Ethan turned back several pages. The same phrases appeared again in different combinations. A station failed to answer. A scheduled delivery arrived late. The dog team carried medicine, radio parts, food, or small fuel containers along a route that should not have required them. He found no single entry dramatic enough to explain the pattern. That was what made it difficult to dismiss. Ordinary failures, written down one after another, could become something more serious when placed side by side. Ethan took a legal pad and copied the dates into 2 columns. He had filled half a page when headlights moved across the front windows. A dark green utility vehicle stopped beside the porch. The woman who stepped out was near 70, with silver hair cut in a neat bob and a deep teal parka buttoned to the throat. She carried a canvas ledger bag under one arm. A red grease pencil was tucked behind her ear. Ethan opened the door before she knocked. "Ethan Cole?" "Yes." "I am Nora Bell. I manage the village supply store and the emergency stockroom." Her gaze moved past him to the appraisal papers on the table, then to the maintenance ledger beside them. She did not ask him to stay in Black Pine. She did not mention duty, family, or what his father would have wanted. "You have every right to sell this cabin," Nora said, "but do not sell it before you understand why your father needed 6 dogs to do the work a company was already being paid to perform." "The battery did not fail," Marcus Lee said. "It was moved." On Ethan's 4th morning in Black Pine, the 71-year-old technician was kneeling in the snow beside the silent warning station. His navy utility coat was zipped to the chin, and a thin pair of titanium glasses sat low on his nose. A small green tool pouch rested against his left hip. Ethan stood a few feet away with Walter and Ranger. The internal cabinet had been opened according to county maintenance procedure. Marcus had photographed every seal before touching it, recorded the time, and checked the service tag against a printed equipment list. Now he pointed to a serial number in his notebook. This station's backup battery is installed in the radio repeater downhill. Could that have been temporary? Ethan asked. It probably was. Marcus did not sound outraged. He sounded annoyed by poor documentation. A technician may have moved it to keep the repeater running. That part is understandable. What is not understandable is signing a service form stating that a replacement battery was installed here. He showed Ethan the maintenance sticker. Nothing was replaced. Ranger stood facing the metal cabinet. He no longer touched the lower plate. The routine had already failed, and there was nothing more for him to do. Ethan looked toward the forest road. One false entry does not prove a larger plan. Marcus closed the cabinet carefully. No, it proves one false entry. That answer was why Ethan trusted him. Marcus did not need the situation to become dramatic in order to take it seriously. They inspected 2 additional warning points before noon. At the first, an invoice listed a new weatherproof housing. In reality, the old housing had been wrapped with sealing tape along one cracked edge. At the second, the equipment heater was listed as replaced, but Marcus found the original unit disconnected and bypassed. Each station still worked in some limited fashion. That made the neglect easier to excuse. Nothing looked destroyed. No wires had been cut. No one had taken a hammer to public equipment. The system had simply been allowed to become less reliable, while the paperwork claimed the opposite. Near the third station, the sound of a diesel engine rose from the main supply road. A dark pickup stopped beside them. Grant Mercer stepped down, wearing a clean navy waxed cotton jacket over a gray sweater. He was 59, tall and broad, with carefully trimmed salt and pepper facial hair. He looked more like a man arriving to solve a problem than one suspected of creating it. His company logo was printed discreetly on the truck door. "Marcus," Grant said, "I heard someone was opening county equipment." "Under authorization," Marcus replied. Grant's eyes shifted to Ethan. "You must be David Cole's son." "Ethan, I am sorry about your father." The sympathy sounded sincere. That made Ethan pay closer attention. Grant examined the open service form without touching it. "We have been moving batteries between low-priority stations for 2 winters. Parts have been difficult to get, and the county reimbursement does not cover actual mountain labor anymore." "You signed that a replacement was installed," Ethan said. "One of my supervisors signed it. On behalf of your company." Grant did not become defensive. He pressed the end of a steel mechanical pencil once, then placed it against his notebook. "I am not saying the paperwork was correct. I am saying the explanation may be less exciting than people want it to be." "What explanation is that?" "Old equipment, rising costs, roads that close without warning, crews who cannot reach every site on schedule." He glanced toward Black Pine below them. "This village wants year-round service at summer prices." Walter's jaw tightened, but Ethan spoke before he could. "Did the county pay for a replacement battery?" "I would have to check the invoice." "Did it pay for the housing and heater at the other stations?" Grant held Ethan's gaze. "Send the serial numbers to my office. I will review them." It was a reasonable answer, perhaps too reasonable. Grant left without making a threat or demanding that Marcus stop. His truck moved carefully down the road, chains gripping the packed snow. Walter watched it disappear. "He has always known how to sound like the only adult in the room." "That does not make him wrong," Ethan said. "No." Walter adjusted the glove on his left hand. "It only makes being wrong easier to hide." That afternoon, Nora Bell cleared a space on the counter inside the Black Pine supply store. The room smelled of coffee, cardboard, and split pine from the bundled kindling stacked near the rear door. Nora had traded her teal parka for a burgundy cardigan and a gray-blue canvas apron. The red grease pencil still rested behind one ear. She placed 3 ledgers in front of Ethan. "I kept the delivery promises in black," she said. "Actual arrivals in red." The pages were not accusations. They were dates. Heating oil promised on a Monday and delivered Thursday. Prescription packages scheduled before a weekend and received the following Tuesday. Food deliveries charged an emergency surcharge even when the road had remained open. Beside many of the delayed entries was a county payment number showing Mercer's company had still received the full contracted amount. Ethan compared Nora's records to the maintenance ledger from the cabin. The dates did not align perfectly. That would have been too convenient. But enough of them overlapped to form a question that could not be ignored. When the warning stations failed, Ethan said, deliveries were more likely to be delayed. Nora nodded. The company could say the road had not been confirmed safe, even when the road was open. They were not always lying. Some days were dangerous. That is what made the other days difficult to challenge. A woman entered from the adjoining clinic, carrying a sealed medical cooler. Elena Ruiz was 66, with dark curls threaded by silver and gathered low behind her head. Slate blue scrubs showed beneath a charcoal cardigan. She set the cooler on the counter. "I heard you were comparing delivery dates," she said. "I am," Ethan replied. "I cannot give you patient names or prescription records." "I would not ask you to." Elena studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I can confirm how many times sealed medication packages arrived within 24 hours of a patient's reserve running out. I can also confirm how often the clinic had to request emergency extensions from pharmacies." "How many?" "Enough that I changed our minimum reserve policy." She did not make the statement dramatic. She did not mention who might have suffered or what could have happened. The restraint gave the information more weight. Nora opened a second ledger. Medicine was not the only pressure point. Before Ethan could ask, the bell above the front door sounded. Martha Keene entered, carrying a canvas shopping bag and a folded fuel notice. At 74, she was tall and slender, with white hair pinned neatly at the back of her head. Her sage green cardigan was buttoned over a cream blouse. Nora introduced them. Martha looked at Ethan's legal pad. "Are you asking about the delayed winter deliveries?" "I'm trying to understand them." "That is different from trying to prove something." "Yes, ma'am." The answer appeared to satisfy her. Martha took a document from her bag and placed it on the counter. It was a loan agreement from a finance company Ethan did not recognize. "I signed this after a heating oil delivery came 4 days late," she said. "I needed enough fuel to keep the pipes from freezing." "Did Mercer's company offer the loan?" "One of his office employees gave me the number." Ethan read the first page. The interest rate was high but not illegal. The repayment schedule was severe but clearly printed. Then he reached the property clause. If Martha chose to sell during the term of the loan, the lender held the first right to purchase the land at a price determined by a listed appraisal method. "Did you understand this when you signed?" Ethan asked. Martha did not look away. "I understood that my house was cold and the temperature was dropping. That was not my question." "No." I did not read every paragraph carefully. Her voice remained calm. "I'm not asking anyone to pretend I did. I made a rushed decision, but the person handing me the paper knew exactly why I was rushing." Ethan looked again at the company name. "Do you know who owns this lender?" "Not fully." Nora found that Mercer's sister-in-law is listed as one of the managers. Nora added, "That is a connection, not proof that Grant controlled Martha's loan." Martha picked up the agreement, but did not put it away. "I do not need him to control it," she said. "I need someone to explain why the same people who failed to bring the oil were ready with papers when I became desperate." That question changed the shape of the room. Until then, Ethan had been looking at faulty stations and late deliveries. Now he saw what came after the delay. Not ruin, dependence. The following morning, Ethan called Rachel Boyd at the county contract office. Rachel listened without interrupting while he described the missing battery, the maintenance invoices, Nora's delivery ledgers, Elena's confirmation, and Martha's loan agreement. When he finished, Rachel said, "What you have is a reason to review the contract. You do not yet have a complete case. What would you require? Proof of payment for work not performed, independent technical findings, records of missed or delayed deliveries, a documented financial connection to the land agreements, voluntary statements from affected residents." Ethan wrote each item down. "And until then, do not accuse anyone publicly. Preserve original documents. Make copies. Record who handled each item." Rachel's voice was level and unsentimental. "If there is misconduct, weak evidence will help the contractor more than strong suspicion will help you." By the 6th day, Ethan had dates covering 3 winters spread across the cabin table. But paper could only show what had been written. He needed to know whether his father's recorded dog team journeys were physically possible within the times listed. Walter harnessed all 6 dogs for a short validation run along the lower trail. Ethan wore his olive combat shirt beneath a dark green shell, charcoal snow pants, and black gloves thin enough to handle the lines. Ranger and Tess stood at the front, burgundy and forest green harnesses marking their positions. At the first turn, Ethan pulled too firmly on Ranger's line. The dog leaned against the pressure and shortened his stride. Tess adjusted to him, and the entire team lost rhythm. "Stop fighting the lead dog," Walter called from the rear of the sled. "I am correcting him." "No. You are telling him you do not trust what he sees." Ethan loosened his grip. He gave the directional command Walter had taught him and waited. Ranger's left ear turned back, his head tilted slightly. Then he lengthened his stride and took the curve smoothly. The other 5 dogs followed. Ethan felt the sled settle beneath his boots. The ledger's travel time was possible. So was the work. When they returned to the cabin, Ethan added the verified route length to his notes. He had enough to continue asking questions, but not enough to claim he knew Grant Mercer's full intention. Nora arrived before dusk to collect copies of the delivery dates. Ethan handed her the papers. "My father must have suspected Mercer from the beginning," he said. Nora did not take the pages immediately. "No," she said. Ethan looked up. "Your father was the first person who asked Black Pine to give Grant Mercer that contract. Your father was the first person who asked Black Pine to give Grant Mercer that contract." Nora's words remained between them. Ethan stood beside the cabin table with one hand, resting on the copied delivery records. Outside, daylight was fading behind the pines. Ranger lay near the mudroom door, but his head had lifted at the change in Ethan's breathing. "You're saying my father put Mercer in place. I'm saying he believed Grant could do the job. That is not what you said." "No." Nora removed the red grease pencil from behind her ear and set it beside the papers. "It isn't." She sat without asking permission, not as a guest settling in, but as someone prepared to stay until a difficult truth had been said correctly. 7 years earlier, she explained, Black Pine had been losing local businesses and working-age families. The previous transport contractor served the village from more than 70 miles away and treated the mountain route as an inconvenience. Grant Mercer had grown up in the county. He employed local drivers, owned his maintenance yard, and promised to keep money in the region. David Cole supported him. "He spoke at the county meeting," Nora said. "He told us Grant understood winter roads because he had grown up on them. Most of us agreed." "Did Grant perform the contract?" "In the beginning, yes." That answer disturbed Ethan more than a simple accusation. Nora continued. "During the first 2 winters, Mercer's deliveries were regular. His crews repaired small washouts, carried supplies after storms, and sometimes made extra stops without charging the village. Then fuel costs rose. 2 drivers left. Insurance increased after an accident on another route. Mercer began cutting hours, then maintenance. Your father defended him longer than I did, Nora said. He said a local company deserved time to recover. Ethan looked at the maintenance ledger, and when the stations began failing, David said old equipment failed everywhere. He wrote the failures down. Later. The distinction was clear. His father had not seen the danger first. He had helped excuse its earliest signs. Ethan's jaw tightened. Why didn't anyone tell me this before? Nora's expression did not change. When would you have listened? The question was not cruel. That made it harder to answer. The next morning, Marcus arrived with 2 thin folders tucked beneath his arm. He placed them on the table beside the ledger and adjusted his glasses. These are copies, he said. The originals remain in county records. The folders contained 2 reports David had submitted during the previous winter. One described repeated signal failures at 3 stations. The other listed 4 deliveries that the dog team had completed after Mercer's vehicles did not arrive. Ethan read both reports twice. Neither accused Mercer of fraud. Neither mentioned Martha's loan or the financial company. The county responses were brief, insufficient evidence of contract breach, likely weather-related service disruption, further technical documentation required. He tried, Ethan said. Marcus sat across from him. Eventually, Ethan looked up. Marcus folded his hands. The small scars and calluses along his fingers were more visible indoors. David spent nearly a year believing Grant would correct the problem if someone spoke to him privately, Marcus said. By the time your father began sending reports, the records were scattered among too many people. Nora had delivery dates. Yes, you had the signal history, some of it, and he had the dog team logs. Marcus nodded. But none of us had put the pieces together. Why not? Because each of us thought the others knew more than they did. It was an ordinary failure. No secret conspiracy. No official paid to look away. Just people working separately, trusting incomplete explanations, and delaying the moment when concern became responsibility. Ethan closed the folders. So my father was building a case. He was correcting a case he helped create. Marcus spoke without bitterness. Those are not the same thing, but both can be true. After Marcus left, Ethan carried the harnesses into the mudroom. At 6:10 that morning, Ranger had taken the burgundy harness from its peg again. Ethan had not returned it to the wall. He had laid it across the bench. Now Walter stood beside him, checking each strap for damage. His white mustache moved slightly as he counted stitches beneath his breath. You knew about the contract, Ethan said. Yes. You knew my father pushed for Mercer. Yes. And you let me believe he had been suspicious from the beginning. Walter tested a buckle with his left hand. I let Nora tell you what belonged to Nora. That is convenient. It is respectful. Ethan turned toward him. Did everyone in this village agree not to speak badly about my father after he died? Walter raised his eyes. No. Most of us simply learned there was no use speaking to you about him while you still needed him to be wrong about everything. The words struck with precision. Ethan looked toward Ranger. The dog stood quietly beside Tess, while the other 4 waited near the kennel gate. Ranger's bent ear shifted toward Ethan, but he did not move. Walter set the harness down. The 6-month care fund was not an order, he said. David knew you might sell the cabin. He knew you might refuse the team. He expected me to. He did not know what to expect. Walter rubbed his right shoulder before continuing. He asked me to keep the dogs healthy long enough for you to decide without panic. That was all. Ethan had spent days believing the money was one final arrangement made around him. One more decision from a father who had always seemed certain that duty outranked affection. But a 6-month fund was not a chain. It was time. His father had left him enough time to say no. Walter handed him Ranger's harness. Put it on him. Ethan approached from the side rather than directly in front. Ranger watched his hands. A week earlier, the dog had stepped away whenever Ethan reached too quickly. This time Ethan paused, allowed Ranger to smell the leather, and waited until the dog shifted his weight forward. Then Ethan fitted the padded chest section and secured the side buckles. Ranger did not retreat. Walter harnessed Tess. Together they prepared the remaining 4 dogs for a short training run along the lower trail. It was Ethan's first time standing alone on the sled runners, while Walter followed on foot for the opening stretch. The team moved before Ethan was fully ready. He caught the handlebar, applied too much brake, and felt the sled jerk beneath him. Ranger glanced back, not defiant, measuring. Ethan eased the brake and gave the command Walter had taught him. The team entered the first turn unevenly but stayed together. Tess held her line beside Ranger. The 4 dogs behind them followed with disciplined force, their breath clouding in the cold air. For 10 minutes, Ethan thought only about balance, distance, and the movement of 6 living bodies connected by trust and tension. There was no room for an argument with a dead man. When they returned, Walter began unharnessing the rear dogs. Ethan remained beside Ranger. "My last call with him," he said, ended with me telling him Black Pine had always received the best of him. Walter did not answer immediately. Ethan removed 1 buckle. "I said his family had learned to survive on whatever was left." That sounds like something a hurt son would say. It was meant to hurt him back. Ranger shifted but did not pull away. Ethan continued. "He told me some responsibilities could not be solved by leaving." Walter looked toward the village below the slope. He was wrong to say it that way. Ethan had expected defense. "You think so?" David often knew what work needed doing. He was less skilled at knowing what people needed hearing. The admission released no sudden forgiveness. It did something quieter. It allowed Ethan to keep the truth of his own pain without turning it into proof that his father had never loved him. That afternoon, Nora returned with the last of the copied delivery records. Ethan told her about the phone call. She listened while standing near the stove, warming her hands around a mug of coffee. When he finished, she said, "Your father was useful to this village." Ethan gave a dry laugh. "That sounds like the beginning of another defense." "It is not." Nora met his eyes. "A man can be useful to a village and still fail his son. One truth does not cancel the other." Ethan looked down at the black face of his diving watch. His thumb rested against the bezel, ready to turn it. He stopped himself. "What am I supposed to do with that?" "Nothing tonight." Nora picked up her ledger bag. "You do not owe the dead a quick forgiveness, but you owe the living an honest decision." After she left, Ethan reopened his father's maintenance book. This time, he did not read it as a message intended for him. He read it as work. Entries grew more detailed over the final months. Route conditions, missed deliveries, battery failures, names of people contacted, places where more documentation was still needed. David had not completed the record. He had not solved the problem. He had only stopped pretending that good intentions excused a failing system. On the 9th morning, Ethan found Ranger standing beneath the harness peg. The burgundy harness lay on the bench where Ethan had left it. Ranger looked at the harness, then at him. Ethan lifted it. "Not yet," he said. But he did not hang it back on the wall. He carried it to the mudroom and began checking the straps. An hour later, Elena Ruiz called from the clinic. The forecast had worsened overnight. A low cloud ceiling and crosswinds were expected to make county helicopter flights impossible. Heavy snow could close the main supply road for at least 3 days. Elena had reviewed the sealed prescription packages, still due to arrive. Nora had checked the village fuel reserve. The clinic, and several medically vulnerable households, had enough essential medication and emergency heating fuel for approximately 2 more days. For the first time since returning to Black Pine, Ethan did not look toward the appraisal papers. He looked at the 6 dogs waiting by the door. By noon, the main supply road had disappeared beneath drifting snow. From the clinic window, Ethan could still see the top rail of the roadside barrier, but the pavement itself had become a smooth white slope. Wind pushed loose snow across it in long sheets, filling the drainage cuts faster than a plow could clear them. A county helicopter had been placed on standby. Then the cloud ceiling dropped. Rachel Boyd called 20 minutes later. "It cannot safely reach Black Pine," she said. "Crosswinds are increasing over the western ridge." Ethan stood at the clinic counter with Elena Ruiz, Nora Bell, Marcus Lee, and Walter Boone. A county map had been spread beside 3 sealed medication coolers. "What about the snowcat?" Ethan asked. "County Public Works has one moving toward the lower pass. It will not reach your side before tomorrow afternoon, assuming the culverts remain visible." "They won't," Walter said. "Not after this wind." Rachel heard him through the speakerphone. "The emergency team can place supplies at the old logging junction," she said. "That is as far as we can guarantee access." Ethan measured the distance on the map. 9 miles by the forest trail. "Approximately. How long will the medication remain stable?" Elena answered before Rachel could. "The coolers are rated well beyond the travel time. Temperature is not our problem. Delay is." She wore slate blue scrubs beneath her charcoal cardigan. Her dark hair, streaked with silver, had been gathered low at the back of her neck. She had already marked each cooler with the clinic seal and a numbered inventory strip. Nora placed a second sheet beside the map. "We are not carrying fuel for the whole village," she said. "That needs to be understood now." No one argued. The remaining heating oil had been divided according to household need. Residents who could safely stay with relatives or use the church warming room had volunteered to conserve what remained at home. The clinic, 2 houses with medical equipment, and several residents who could not be moved, needed limited bridge fuel. Elena pointed to the list. Enough for 24 to 48 hours. No more. Ethan looked at Walter. "Can the dogs carry it?" Walter did not answer until he saw the containers. Not with a careless load. He removed a pencil from behind his ear and began calculating weights on the margin of the map. The medicine rides low and centered, batteries behind it. Fuel divided evenly. No loose cans. No extra equipment because someone thinks it might be useful. Ethan recognized the last comment as directed at him. "I haven't added anything." "You were looking at the rescue pack. It has tools. It also weighs 18 pounds. Ethan folded his arms. "What do you leave behind if the sled breaks?" "The things that are already mounted to the sled." Walter tapped the small repair pouch attached beneath the handlebar. "This is not a field exercise. You are not planning for every possible failure. You are planning for the most likely ones without exhausting the team." For years, Ethan had been paid to imagine what could go wrong. Now Walter was asking him to accept that carrying every solution could become another kind of danger. Rachel confirmed that the county team would leave the supplies at the junction before nightfall. Marcus established radio check times. Elena completed the medication manifest without including patient names on the outer document. Nora returned to the supply room to organize fuel sharing and firewood deliveries. The work divided itself among people who knew their part. Ethan found that harder to trust than a plan he controlled alone. That afternoon, Walter took him and the team onto the lower trail. Ranger wore the burgundy pulling harness. Tess stood beside him in forest green. The 4 dogs behind them shifted with contained energy, their lines straight but not yet under full tension. Ethan wore insulated charcoal overalls over his olive combat shirt, a dark green shell, and thin black gloves. Walter had rejected his heavier gloves because they dulled his grip on the lines. "You remember the commands," Walter said. "That does not mean you remember the dogs." "I understand." "No, you agree. Understanding comes later." Walter inspected the brake while Ethan checked the cargo straps on a set of weighted practice boxes. The first run covered less than 3 miles. Ethan kept too much pressure on the brake during the descent, forcing the wheel dogs closest to the sled to pull against resistance they did not need. On the next rise, he released too quickly and allowed the team to stretch unevenly. Walter corrected him without raising his voice. "Watch their shoulders." Ethan looked ahead. "Not just Ranger. All 6. Tess maintained a steady line. One of the middle dogs favored the packed snow near the right edge. The rear pair shortened their stride whenever the sled drifted toward the ditch. The team gave information constantly. Ethan had been listening only for commands. At a shallow turn, Ranger began moving left before Ethan called it. Ethan pulled the line right. Ranger resisted. The team lost rhythm. "Let him finish seeing," Walter called. "I need him on the trail." "He is on the trail. You are looking at the old track. He is looking at the drift covering it." Ethan released some tension. Ranger moved 2 feet left, passed around a soft mound of wind-blown snow, then returned to the center. The sled crossed the spot Ethan had tried to use. One runner sank nearly to the frame. He understood then. Ranger had not ignored him. The dog had seen what he had not. When they returned to the cabin, Ethan entered the time, distance, and team response in a fresh notebook instead of writing in his father's ledger. Walter noticed. "You could use David's." "This one is mine." Walter gave a small nod and went to check the dog's feet. The distinction mattered to Ethan. He was learning from his father's work, but he did not need to write his own choices inside another man's book. The following morning, the village operated under Nora's conservation plan. No speeches were made. People simply did what had been agreed. 2 residents moved into spare rooms with relatives. The church opened its side hall for anyone whose home became too cold. A retired mechanic brought split firewood to the clinic. Elena called each household affected by the delayed prescriptions and explained the plan without promising a delivery time she could not guarantee. Ethan listened to the coordination over Marcus's radio. No one waited for him to give permission. For the first time, that did not feel like losing control. The final training run began near the warning station shortly after 2. Marcus had restored limited power to the system. A portable generator stood beside his utility vehicle, feeding test equipment while he monitored voltage levels. Walter had chosen the route because it included 2 turns, a short climb, and a section where Ethan had to stop the sled on an incline. The dogs started cleanly. Ranger and Tess set the pace. Snow moved beneath their paws in soft, controlled bursts. Ethan used the brake less and watched the whole line rather than focusing only on the lead pair. They had nearly passed the station when the generator backfired. The sharp report cracked through the trees. Ranger lunged sideways. Tess held forward for 1 step, then turned toward him. The dogs behind them lost alignment as the lead line shifted. Ethan tightened both hands around the handlebar. "Ranger, forward!" The dog pulled harder to the left, eyes wide, ears flattened. The bent tip of his left ear trembled. Ethan raised his voice. Walter seized the side of the sled. "Stop commanding him! He is pulling the team offline. He's afraid. I can see that. No, you see disobedience." The words cut through Ethan's urgency. He locked the brake. Ranger strained against the harness, breathing fast. Tess remained beside him, her body angled between Ranger and the rest of the team. She did not drag him forward. She simply held enough tension to keep the lines from tangling. Walter spoke quietly. "Get low. Loosen the lead. Do not crowd him." Ethan stepped off the runners and crouched several feet behind Ranger. His first instinct was to close the distance, take the harness, and force stillness into the dog's body. He did none of those things. He lowered his voice. "Easy." Ranger looked back but did not move toward him. The generator had gone silent. Marcus stood beside it, one hand raised to show he would not restart it. Tess touched her nose to Ranger's shoulder. Ranger's breathing slowed. Ethan allowed the lead to remain loose. After nearly a minute, Ranger shifted his weight forward. His ears rose. The other dogs settled as the tension returned evenly through the line. Ethan gave the command again, softer this time. Ranger stepped back onto the trail. The team followed. They completed the run without another break in rhythm. At the cabin, Walter removed Ranger's harness and examined his chest for rubbing. "You knew about the engine noise," Ethan said. "I knew he disliked sudden reports." "That was more than dislike." "Yes. Why didn't you tell me it could be that strong?" "Because seeing fear described on paper is not the same as meeting it in the dog." Ethan looked toward Ranger, who had moved to stand beside Tess. "What caused it?" "A recovery trip 2 winters ago. Snowmobile engine backfired beside the team after they had been working for hours." Ranger broke line and nearly pulled 2 dogs into a drainage cut. "Was he injured?" "No." "Frightened?" Walter straightened slowly, favoring his right shoulder. David spent months teaching him that one sound did not mean the whole trail was dangerous. Ethan had spent much of his life trying to command fear out of himself. It had never worked as well as he pretended. "What did I do wrong?" he asked. "You made the command louder, when the dog needed the situation made smaller." Walter gathered the harnesses. "Remember that tomorrow." By evening, the county emergency team confirmed the supplies had reached the logging junction. Marcus had the radio schedule written in large block letters beside the cabin set. Elena delivered the sealed manifest and explained which cooler had to be opened, first after arrival. Nora reported that the remaining fuel had been distributed according to the conservation plan. Walter approved the final cargo weight. It came to just under 90 pounds, not including the sled or Ethan. Nothing unnecessary remained. Ethan checked each strap twice, then stopped himself before checking a 3rd time. He trusted Walter's inspection. Before dawn, the 6 dogs stood harnessed in the cabin yard. The sky was still dark, but the wind had eased. A narrow break in the weather was expected to last through the morning. Ranger faced the forest road. Tess stood quietly at his side. Breath rose from the team in pale clouds. Ethan stepped onto the runners. Walter did not offer a blessing or remind him of David. He rested one gloved hand on the handlebar and asked only one question. "Are you ready to listen to Ranger?" The team left Black Pine 35 minutes before sunrise. No one gathered to watch. A light burned in the church side hall, where Nora had arranged temporary warmth for several residents. Another glowed behind the clinic windows. The rest of the village remained dark beneath wind-packed snow. Ethan stood on the sled runners, wearing insulated charcoal overalls, an olive thermal layer, and the dark green shell Walter had checked the night before. A paper map rested inside a waterproof case against his chest. His compass was clipped where he could reach it without removing his gloves. Ranger and Tess waited at the front of the 6-dog team. The burgundy harness across Ranger's chest stood out against his black and gold coat. Tess's forest green harness marked her place beside him. 4 dogs formed the middle and wheel positions behind them, their lines straight and their breath rising into the cold air. Walter gave the brake one final pull. "First radio check at the lower marker," he said. "Second at the creek crossing." Ethan nodded. "If Ranger changes pace, look at the whole team before you correct him." "I know." Walter looked at him. Ethan amended his answer. "I'll remember." That was enough. He released the brake and gave the starting command. The lines tightened one after another. The sled moved from the yard and entered the narrow forest road. For the first mile, Ethan concentrated on restraint. The dogs wanted to run faster than the trail allowed. The snow was firm near the cabin, but softer beneath the trees, where the wind had carried powder across the old sled track. Ethan used the brake in short touches rather than holding it down. Ranger set a controlled pace. Tess matched him without crowding. At the first reflective marker, Ethan stopped the team and called Marcus. "Lower marker reached. All 6 dogs moving clean." Marcus's voice came through the radio with a layer of static. "Signal received. Wind at the ridge station is 8 miles per hour from the west. Visibility unchanged." Ethan recorded the time in his notebook. He was not using his father's ledger. The route belonged to the old records. The decisions made on it belonged to him. Beyond the marker, the trail bent through thicker pine. Fresh snow had hidden the shallow grooves left by previous runs. Ethan checked the map against his compass and the coordinates copied from David's notes. Ranger moved near the center of the trail, then shifted gradually toward the left edge. Ethan led him. A dark shape emerged beneath the snow several yards later, the upper half of a timber post marked with old reflective tape. A faint smell of pine resin remained where someone had once coated the wood against moisture. Ranger passed close to it and continued. He was not following a magical scent across miles of wilderness. He was recognizing fragments of a route repeated through years of training. Familiar trees, turns, ground contours, old wood, and the remembered sequence of the trail. Ethan confirmed the heading before allowing the pace to increase. At the creek crossing, the wind had covered part of the narrow bridge. Ethan stopped the sled, secured the brake, and walked ahead with a probe pole. The bridge remained solid. Snow had drifted against the uphill rail, but had not buried the far edge. He returned, checked the dog's lines, and called Marcus again. "Creek crossing clear." "Received. County team reports the supplies are secure at the junction. Weather window still holding." The team continued. By the time the sky brightened, the dogs had settled into an efficient rhythm. Ethan stopped twice for brief water and paw checks. No pads were cracked. No harnesses had shifted. Ranger drank, shook snow from his muzzle, and moved back into position before Ethan called him. The old logging junction appeared shortly before 10. A metal freight box had been chained beneath a 3-sided shelter. The county emergency crew had already departed before the upper road worsened. A bright orange tag showed the time the supplies had been delivered. Ethan secured the team in the sheltered side of the clearing and opened the freight box. Inside were 3 sealed medication coolers, 2 communication batteries, a repair component for the warning system, and 4 small approved fuel containers. Each item carried a number matching Elena's manifest. He checked every seal. Nothing was missing. Walter's weight calculations had left little room for error. Ethan placed the medicine low and close to the center of the sled. The batteries went behind it. The fuel containers were divided evenly and strapped upright in padded brackets. He pulled each strap once, then he pulled them again. His hand moved toward the first strap a 3rd time. He stopped. Walter had inspected the system. Ethan had followed the load plan. Repeating the same action would not make the cargo safer. It would only make departure later. The dogs rested while he ate half a sandwich and called Black Pine. Elena answered from the clinic. "All seals intact," Ethan told her. "We are loaded. Which cooler is forward?" "Number 2. That is the correct priority." Nora came onto the radio next. "Fuel plan is ready. Do not change the load to bring more." "I won't." The instruction would once have irritated him. Now it simply clarified the mission. He gave the team another 15 minutes, checked their feet, and began the return trip. The added weight changed everything. The runners sank deeper. The wheel dogs worked harder on inclines. Ethan stepped off and ran beside the sled during 2 climbs to reduce the load. On descents, he controlled the brake carefully enough to keep the sled from pushing into the team. Ranger adjusted the pace without being told. When the trail narrowed, he shortened his stride. Tess kept her shoulder nearly level with his, preventing the lead line from drifting. At noon, Marcus reported that the western ridge had disappeared behind lower cloud. "You have perhaps 3 hours before the next band reaches the forest trail," he said. "How fast is it moving?" "Faster than the earlier forecast." Ethan looked at the map. The direct route would return them to the creek crossing in less than an hour. The marked alternate curved around the lower slope and added several miles. For the moment, there was no reason to use it. They continued on the direct trail. The wind changed first. It moved through the trees with a lower sound, lifting loose snow from branches and laying it across the track. Ranger lowered his head but maintained pace. The team entered a long section beneath an open slope. Ethan recognized it from the morning journey. Nothing had appeared unstable then. The angle was moderate, and the trail crossed below it for less than 200 yards. Ranger slowed. Ethan looked past him. There was no fallen tree, no exposed rock, no broken marker. "Forward," Ethan called. Ranger took 2 steps. Then he stopped. Tess halted beside him. The middle pair tightened the line, then settled. The wheel dogs remained in place without crowding the sled. Ethan gave the command again. Ranger did not move. The dog's ears were forward. His body was not turned away from the trail, as it had been near the generator. He was not trying to escape. He was listening. A faint, deep sound passed beneath the wind. Not a crack. More like the settling of something heavy. Ethan locked the brake. The weather window was closing. The alternate route would cost time and strength. Medicine was waiting at the clinic. Fuel was already being rationed. Every practical pressure urged him forward. He remembered Walter's question before departure. "Are you ready to listen to Ranger?" Listening did not mean obeying blindly. It meant treating the dog's reaction as information. Ethan secured the sled to a pine, removed the probe pole, and walked ahead without bringing the team onto the open section. At first, the snow looked smooth. Then he saw a line no wider than a bootlace running across the upper layer. It began near a wind-loaded hollow and continued toward a stand of brush. He crouched. The snow beneath the newest layer had a harder crust. Wind had deposited a softer slab above it along the slope. Ranger had not identified an avalanche. He had detected something wrong, perhaps a vibration, a shift in sound, or the movement of snow beneath the surface. Ethan used what Walter had taught him to interpret the rest. He backed away and called Marcus. "Direct trail is showing a surface crack beneath the open slope. Ranger stopped before the crossing." Marcus was silent for a moment. "Can you confirm instability?" "I can confirm wind loading and separation between layers. I am not taking the team through. The alternate route remains mapped. It adds at least 2 hours." "Understood." Ethan returned to the sled and loosened the lead line enough to turn the team without tangling it. "Back," he commanded. Ranger stepped away from the slope. Tess moved with him. The rest of the team reversed in practiced stages until the sled faced stable ground. They had gone less than 50 yards when the sound came again. A section of snow slid from the upper slope and crossed the direct trail. It was not a towering avalanche. No trees broke. No great cloud swallowed the forest. The slide was only large enough to bury part of the trail and push loose snow against the trunks below. Large enough to trap a sled. Large enough to injure a dog. Large enough to prove that speed would have been the wrong choice. Ethan looked at Ranger. The dog did not look back for praise. He was already facing the alternate turn. "Take it," Ethan said. The longer route descended into denser forest before curving toward the creek. Snow there was softer, and Ethan spent much of the distance walking beside the sled. His legs burned. The wheel dogs tired first, so he called more frequent rests and reduced the pace. At each stop, Ranger moved down the line and briefly touched noses with the dogs behind him. Tess remained near the front, quiet and steady. They were not machines carrying a load. They were 6 animals doing difficult work within limits Ethan was responsible for respecting. The next weather band reached the trees during the final mile. Snow thickened, but the forest road near Black Pine had more markers and a firmer base. Marcus guided them by radio through the last 2 turns. The clinic appeared through the snow shortly before 4. Elena was waiting beneath the covered entrance with a handcart. Nora stood beside her in the teal parka, while Marcus watched from the utility shed near the restored radio equipment. Ethan stopped the team before the steps. Elena checked each numbered seal before anyone moved the coolers. "All intact," she said. The medicine went directly inside. Nora supervised the fuel transfer according to the plan prepared the previous day. No one rushed the containers to the loudest person or the nearest house. The clinic received its portion first. The remaining fuel was assigned to the households already identified. Marcus carried the new battery and repair component to the communication station. Walter approached Ranger only after every item had been removed from the sled. He placed one hand against the dog's chest, checking his breathing and harness contact points. "How did he run?" Walter asked. Ethan looked toward the snow falling beyond the clinic roof. "He stopped us beneath the open slope." "Fear?" "No." "What did you see?" "Not enough at first." Walter waited. Ethan unfastened Ranger's burgundy harness. "Then I looked again." Ranger stood still until the harness cleared his shoulders. Afterward, he stepped close enough for his shoulder to rest briefly against Ethan's knee. There was no celebration. The main road remained closed. The village still needed a permanent transport solution. Grant Mercer could still blame the delays on weather. But before darkness reached Black Pine, the clinic had its medicine, the emergency fuel had been divided, and the warning system had power again. The team had not solved everything. It had given the village time. The morning after the rescue run, Martha Keene placed her loan agreement on the clinic table. Ethan had arrived expecting a planning meeting. Rachel Boyd had driven up from the county office before the road fully reopened, wearing a charcoal field jacket over a dark olive turtleneck. Her black folder lay open beside 3 stacks of documents. Marcus had brought his technical reports. Nora carried delivery ledgers and payment records. Elena had prepared a summary of clinic disruptions without patient names. Walter held copies of the dog team logs. No single stack proved everything. Together, they showed enough to begin. Rachel explained the immediate steps in a calm voice. Mercer Transport would be temporarily removed from the Black Pine route because maintenance records could not be trusted during a safety review. A neighboring contractor and the county emergency team would handle essential deliveries until the road conditions stabilized. The disputed land agreements were more complicated. "The county cannot cancel private contracts from this table," Rachel said. "County council has referred them to the State Consumer Protection Office. The lender has been asked to suspend any purchase action while the agreements are reviewed." Martha sat with her back straight, her white hair pinned neatly behind her head. A navy fountain pen rested beside her hand. Ethan glanced at the property clause in her contract. "I can explain how the delivery delay connects to the loan," he said. Martha drew the papers toward herself. "This is my land," she said. "I will explain why I signed." Ethan stopped. A week earlier, he might have believed helping meant speaking more clearly than she could, organizing the facts, and protecting her from difficult questions. Now he understood that taking over her story would only repeat another form of control. He leaned back. Martha told Rachel that the oil delivery had been 4 days late. She described the temperature inside her house, the risk to her pipes, and the office employee who had handed her the lender's phone number. She did not claim anyone forced her signature. "I was frightened and impatient," she said. "I read the first pages and skimmed the rest. That was my mistake." Then she tapped the right of first purchase clause with one finger. "Their mistake was knowing why I was desperate and using that moment to put this in front of me." Rachel asked who had contacted her afterward. Martha produced 3 letters offering to discuss a future sale of her property. Each had arrived after a delayed payment. No one in the room called it proof of a conspiracy. Rachel labeled the letters for review and placed them in the section marked Financial Connection. The process continued for 2 hours. Marcus explained the serial numbers showing that batteries and equipment had been moved between stations, while replacement work was billed as complete. Nora provided delivery schedules, actual arrival dates, emergency surcharges, and county payment numbers. Elena confirmed how often clinic operations had been placed within 24 hours of exhausting medication reserves. She refused to identify individual patients, and Rachel did not ask her to. Walter explained the winter rescue team's purpose and the realistic limits of 6 German Shepherds. The dogs had never been intended to replace a commercial carrier. Their logs showed only the occasions when local volunteers had been forced to bridge failures in the official service. Ethan submitted his father's maintenance ledger and his own timeline. He did not describe David as a whistleblower who had understood everything from the beginning. He stated that David had supported Mercer's original contract, defended it during its early decline, and later began documenting the consequences. Rachel looked up from the timeline. "You are including your father's role, even though it weakens the cleaner version of the story. It makes the record accurate. That matters more." By afternoon, Grant Mercer arrived with an attorney and his company files. He wore a charcoal suit, white shirt, and dark green tie. The steel mechanical pencil in his hand clicked once before he placed it beside his notebook. Grant did not deny that his company had lost money on the Black Pine route. "Fuel, labor, insurance, equipment," he said. "The contract stopped reflecting the cost of mountain service years ago." "Then why did you continue billing for work your crews did not complete?" Rachel asked. "We kept the system operating with what we had." "The invoices say equipment was replaced." Grant looked toward Marcus's photographs. "Some supervisors used the wrong service codes." "At 3 separate stations? I am not defending poor paperwork." Rachel's expression remained neutral. "You are being asked to explain it." Grant shifted to the argument Ethan suspected he had made to himself many times. Black Pine was shrinking. Young families were leaving. The proposed resort road would bring construction jobs, tourists, and a larger tax base. Properties along the route would become more valuable. "The village cannot survive by preserving every acre exactly as it was 50 years ago," Grant said. "People were going to sell eventually. I believed development could give them a better price and keep this region alive." Martha answered before Ethan could. "A better price is still not a fair choice if someone first makes it harder for us to stay." Grant looked at her, but he did not reply. His vision for development was not automatically corrupt. His company's financial trouble was real. Black Pine did need reliable jobs and infrastructure. None of that required false maintenance records. None of it justified allowing essential service to decline without disclosure. And none of it gave him the right to profit from the dependence that decline created. Rachel did not announce a verdict that day. She closed the black folder and explained what would happen next. Contract audit, invoice verification, interviews with company employees, and referral of the loan records to the appropriate state office. Grant left without handcuffs, threats, or a confession. Outside, his truck started normally and drove down the reopened road. Justice, Ethan realized, rarely arrived with the clean finality people imagined. More often, it began with records that could no longer be ignored. The temporary delivery system remained in place for the next 3 weeks. A neighboring carrier handled scheduled freight under county supervision. Black Pine appointed Nora to confirm household deliveries, Marcus to review station reports, and Elena to advise on medical priority. Ethan was not automatically placed in charge. That felt right. The county audit eventually confirmed that Mercer Transport had billed for replacement equipment that had not been installed and repeatedly reported maintenance as complete when only temporary repairs had been made. The county commissioners terminated the contract for cause. Repayment of public funds would be handled through a separate financial process. The State Consumer Protection Office began reviewing the lender's relationship with Mercer's company and the circumstances surrounding the property clauses. Some questions remained unresolved. No one pretended otherwise. Grant lost the route, the authority it had given him over Black Pine's supply line, and the ability to treat service failures as private business decisions. His company would now have to answer for its records and finances through the proper proceedings. Black Pine also had to accept its own responsibility. The village had trusted a local name for too long. It had allowed maintenance reports to pass without independent review. People had worked around failures instead of forcing the system to acknowledge them. A new advisory group was created for the next transport contract. Nora represented supply needs. Marcus reviewed technical requirements. Elena advised on medical continuity. Martha declined a formal position. "I have had enough contracts for one winter," she said. But she agreed to review the language given to residents whenever emergency financing was offered. Walter organized a volunteer rotation for the dog team, so no single person or family would quietly become responsible for every winter problem. Ethan attended the meetings, but he did not sit at the head of the table. One evening, he called his contract partner in Washington. The conversation lasted 12 minutes. Ethan postponed the next in-person training assignment and arranged to complete safety reviews remotely through the end of winter. He did not resign. He did not announce that he had found a new calling. He gave himself time. The property appraiser sent the final cabin valuation 2 days later. The broker asked whether Ethan wanted to authorize the listing. He left the email unanswered. During the following weeks, Walter continued training him with the team. Some mornings went well. On others, Ethan mistimed a turn or used too much brake, and Walter told him exactly what he had done wrong. Ranger did not become perfectly obedient. He still tested the pressure on the line and occasionally chose the edge of a trail Ethan had not noticed. Tess continued to steady the team when Ranger became too eager. The work remained work. That was part of why Ethan trusted it. One afternoon, he carried his father's maintenance ledger to the desk. Beside it, he placed the new notebook containing his own route times, equipment checks, and mistakes. The books did not match. David's handwriting was narrow and compressed. Ethan's was larger, with more space between entries. He did not combine them. He no longer needed to. At the end of the 3rd week, Ethan called the broker and withdrew the cabin from preparation for sale. "For how long?" she asked. "I don't know." "Should I mark it as delayed?" "No. Mark it withdrawn." After the call, he stood alone in the kitchen. There was no sense of triumph, no sudden assurance that he had forgiven his father or chosen the correct life forever. He had simply made a decision that belonged to him. He would remain through winter. He would continue his consulting work from Black Pine. He would learn from Walter and serve in the volunteer rotation like everyone else. If he stayed longer, that would be another decision made later. At 6:10, one quiet morning, leather struck the wall beside the front door. Ranger had pushed the burgundy harness from its peg. There was no avalanche warning. No one was missing. The supply road was open, and the new carrier had arrived on schedule. Nora had called about an older neighbor recovering from surgery. The woman had requested 2 boxes of food and a small load of split firewood. She had specified where she wanted everything placed and had warned Nora not to rearrange her kitchen. Ethan checked the forecast. Light snow, stable temperature, no wind advisory. He reviewed the delivery list, then looked at the old telephone resting on the shelf. It had belonged to his father. For weeks, Ethan had avoided touching it, as though the receiver might still contain the final words neither man could take back. He did not reach for it now. He also did not turn it face down. Some things could remain without controlling the room. Ethan put on his olive combat shirt, charcoal snow pants, and dark green shell. He checked the harnesses and called each dog by name. Ranger stepped outside first. Tess moved beside him. The other 4 dogs entered their positions without confusion or ceremony. Ethan closed the cabin door and took hold of the sled. He was not continuing his father's life. He was carrying forward useful work, correcting what needed correction, and choosing for himself what was worth keeping. Sometimes, the life we are meant to live is not the one someone left behind for us, but the one we freely choose when the truth asks something of us. Ethan did not stay to become his father. He stayed because helping others had finally become his own decision. In our lives, grace may not arrive as a great miracle. Sometimes, it is simply the courage to do the next right thing, and the humility to let others help us do it. What responsibility have you chosen, not because you had to, but because you believed it was right? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories of loyalty, courage, and quiet grace. May God give you wisdom for the choices ahead and peace in the path you choose.